Welcome to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed, where conversations are designed for nonprofit leaders by nonprofit leaders to inspire, educate, and motivate. Get ready to dive into the world of nonprofits where the nerdy passion and unstoppable dedication of those making a real impact is celebrated. Together with your host, Jarrett Ransom, the inspiring stories, tactical insights, and game-changing strategies of nonprofit leaders will be explored. Join us for real talk with real people. Jarrett and her guests unravel the mysteries of successful fundraising, uncover the secrets of effective advocacy, and nerd out over innovative approaches to solving social challenges. Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed is your go-to podcast for no-nonsense discussions with real-life superheroes of the nonprofit sector. Get ready to unleash your inner nerdiness and discover or rediscover how to change the world together. Now let's dive in and embrace the power of our nerdy side.
Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Matt Sandoval, who serves as the CEO of Art Heals Arizona. Matt is here to share the insights and lessons from his organization's recent rebrand experience, and he does so openly and transparently. I really value this conversation with Matt, and I think that you will too. So if you are in the middle of a name change or in the middle of a rebrand, or even just considering whether a rebrand is right for your organization, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. Matt talks with me candidly about what worked, what surprised him, and what he learned along the way, and the realities of navigating a rebrand as a nonprofit leader. And of course, before we jump into this juicy conversation with Matt, I want to give a big shout out of gratitude to Bloomerang for supporting these conversations and for being our podcast sponsor. Now let's get into this conversation with Matt Sandoval. Well, hey there and welcome. I am super thrilled to introduce all of you to today's guest. We have Matt Sandoval joining us. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, Jarrett.
Well, thank you. I always like to say thank you to the guest because you could have said no to this conversation, but you said yes. And this is a conversation that I don't think we have often enough. We're going to talk a little bit about rebrands and organizations going through that. And that is something that you have done pretty recently. I think recent, but you might have said that was so last year. Before we dive into this juicy conversation, Matt, would you just start us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and really like how you show up in this space in the sector.
Yes. Thanks, Jared, first off, for having me on here, and happy to come tell our story and talk about how that connects because we're in the space, we're on the backside of a rebrand where we are experiencing the benefits of doing that. So always happy to share that. But to give your audience kind of a foundation of who I am, I'm a Valley native, grew up here, have not ever moved away. I don't know why that is, even though the summers keep telling me that might be a mistake. But that's where we are. And I love it here. And happy to serve. I've been in this space serving in and around the nonprofit space for around 20 plus years. I'll just keep saying plus at this point in my career. I've been a teacher before. I've worked in programming that helps children, youth, or families. Big organizations, big brands, national federated groups for over 10 years, smaller nonprofits, including those serving adults with developmental disabilities. And then somewhere in midlife, I decided that I was too bored in my downtime and decided to go back and get additional training and became an associate licensed counselor. And so that all feeds in. I have a master in social work. And then outside of my life at Art Heals Arizona, I do a small practice, mostly with couple relationship therapy, but also individuals. And that all paints a picture around what I do now at Art Heals Arizona. I've been there 4 years, 3 as the leader of leading and casting vision and supporting an effort that really provides an important link for people to experience well-being and a journey and healing. And it's all in our name. And that population is a pretty special one. These are children in foster care or who live in shelter environments because they're experiencing homelessness or they have had recent experiences with domestic violence. So happy to be here and happy to be telling that story and to be part of something that's evolving and continuing to grow.
Well, thank you, Matt. And you sure do wear a lot of hats. That's why I always open up with like, tell me the role or roles, plural, right? Knowing that many of us wear multiple hats. And it's been honestly a blessing to watch your trajectory, to see you grow in all of these different ways and how you show up in the community. So when Matt references the Valley, he also is in the Metro Phoenix area. Really excited to have this conversation with you, Matt. So thank you for telling us a little bit more about you. And diving right in, as I promised, a juicy conversation. But today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about organizational name change and rebrands. And the nonprofit you lead recently went through this. You just said you're on the backside of that. And again, I don't think we talk about this often enough. So first of all, I do believe that every rebrand starts with a reason. And I told you this before I hit record, but for those of you listening, Free Arts of Arizona, which used to be the name of your organization, is my very first consulting client. So back in 2009. So having this conversation with you, Matt, and really learning soup to nuts, like, how all of this took place. I'd really like to know what prompted the organization to consider a name change, and how did you know it was the right time to make such a significant shift? But it wasn't lost on me. I'm going to stop talking here in a second. You said successful. So give me all the insight. I want to hear more.
Sure. Yes, and it's important that you're framing that time period in a way where that was already floating around. What is the utility, the usefulness of our name? And so when it came down to it, it really was a function of several really key stakeholder groups having explored this before and interested in it. And I hadn't brought it up because I've only been there 4 years. Or at the time, I'd only been there a year, brought into the role. And so as I'm getting onboarded into being the CEO and just understanding more of the history, you know that entering the space causes change to take place. And so you have to calculate pretty quickly, how much do I want to instigate new change? Because there definitely is a mindset of, this is a little bit passé now, but more of like the disruptor or and that sounds a very ego-based way of operating in leadership, in my opinion, because what we want is continuity and experience of our programs. And so when you come into a new space, it's important to understand what makes this what it is, because we don't want to shut that off. But at the same time, within my first year, in my big chart, my old-fashioned OneNote of things I'm working on now and things that I'll get to at some point, in the one-day column was just 2 words: the name. And so it had always been something that I had said, like, this is who we are. I knew right away people were always going to ask me, what does that mean? And I also knew that there was going to be some segment of my audience that thought they could just come and get free stuff, because that's what the name says. It's free arts, right? So there was always an extra element of explanation. But the longer version of the story, as I was told originally, was we've had to be very careful about the full legal name, because the full legal name, blessed by the originators in 1993, was Free Arts for Abused Children of Arizona. So this name itself is a time capsule of how we've had changes in attitudes in the way we describe our work and our impact. Because do children who have experienced abuse take part in our programming? Yes. Do they love seeing that on the sign? And the answer is no. Nobody does. And almost originally to the moment, there was already, are you sure about that on the sign? So by the time I arrived, 20-ish, 25-ish years later, we have 2 sets of collateral. We don't ever show the full legal name. So we have a full legal name and then an operating tag, Free Arts Arizona, that's taking out the stigmatizing part. So it had this wonkiness, this 2 sets. Where do we say this? Where do we talk about it? And that also matches with the collective field of understanding about how do we describe the impact of what we do, our audience, without reminding people of a label that isn't comfortable to carry. And we have to ask ourselves in the sector, do we do harm when we do that? We have to be descriptive, but do we create a label that carries on? And so there's always an evolution in the way we describe circumstances and outcomes and our own positioning, because ideally, we would live in a society where none of this was necessary. That's the real truth. If things were going well across the system, there'd be less domestic violence, less experiences of homelessness, and less abuse and neglect of children. So the fact that we exist tells us not all is well. And so we have to exist in this uncomfortable balance of telling a story of impact while also wishing that need wasn't also present. So how do you balance that out? And we have to work to understand the next steps of our strategy. And about 2.5 years, 2-ish years ago, one of our long-term serving board members, we have a rotating class system. So you can serve 3 2-year terms and you must sit out. But we've had a couple members who sit now who've returned. So this person had just returned after a break, having served a prior 6-year term. Former board president, Kathy Graham, who actually in a strategic oriented board meeting said, gang, I got to be honest about something. If we're going to be talking about expanding our work across the state, then we need to change the name now before we go further and have to tell people, oh, we told you we were this, but now we're this. And so that is where the moment where I have no political capital in this space idea of the name became, oh, there is energy around this that I can work with, that I can support. And that's how it started, was seeing that there is an opportunity to better tell our story quickly, to engage people where the answer is yes, while also talking about the most aspirational and expressive thing that we do, which is we support well-being. That's in that concept of healing. We're not the healers. Healing is happening as a function of lots of different factors and relationships. But if we were to settle on one thing, we think the creative process is itself healing. And those of you in the audience that love art are already nodding because you feel it. So that is kind of the synopsis of how we got to this within my tenure of leadership. And really, it's about the right time and the right people who are willing to take that risk to say, this is where we need to go.
Thank you for sharing that. The timeline, like the rationale behind it. And as you mentioned, yes, the name, as you said, two words on your list, was being talked about in 2009. So it has been a long evolving conversation. I want to acknowledge, one, you had a visionary leader that brought this up from the board perspective. And two, you and the rest collectively, right? Acknowledge the evolution of terminology. I have worked with many organizations as well, Matt, and I've seen where it's well, we can say this on grant applications, but we don't dare say that in public marketing materials or collateral, right? And so really trying to decipher, when do we go by this name? When do we go by that name? How do people know us? So I do think that there's, with rebrand comes excitement for some people, but it also can bring uncertainty for others. Maybe that's with staff, board members, donors, even the community at large. I heard you, though, you mentioned, there was a lot of stakeholder conversations, a lot of, I'm assuming, dialogue when it came to this. So can you share with us, how did you bring stakeholders along throughout the process and build trust during the transition? And I want to add keep trust, right? Because it sounds like you really had trust. Maybe you were still building in some areas, but how did all of this unfold in these stakeholder conversations?
Yeah, going back to that beginning, it was either an August or September meeting. So that's important because our board vote around the name change took place about 6 months later, which gave us 6 months of us talking to people. And my metric was essential. Let's make a list. Who would we want to tell rather than have them find out about it some other way? So think about the not so fun surprises in your life, and the difference it makes when somebody says, hey, I need to talk to you. I want to give you a heads up about something. And we knew at this point that we hadn't done anything public. There was certainly not anything done that we couldn't walk back. So we were in the safest possible place with, I have an idea or we have an idea. And that was an important part of phrasing it as a collective. But we made a list that included, some donors, some former board members, board presidents, people who helped found the institution. And we went and talked about what to them they had some experience with is we're returning back to the dilemma of the name. We also think that this is an opportunity for us to take some action. We also have run a process. So this is something a little different than a lot of places. We kind of knew where we wanted to be. So we didn't hire an exterior group. And this is not to criticize that. I don't know that much about hiring a group to come learn about me to tell me what my name should be. We already had it as a tagline. We had Art Heals AZ as an established tagline. So Art Heals Arizona was something we tested among allowing staff and board to all contribute names into an idea and blind vote. And it was really one of the more comforting things that Art Heals Arizona, and in particular, letting Arizona be a differentiator in that phrase, became something there was very strong consensus about. And that's important because I learned later that in the several years between your original work with then Free Arts and where we are now, we've gotten as close to voting on a name and they didn't pass it. So it was not Art Heals Arizona. And I think that was part of the issue was people couldn't even gather around the new name. So it is fearful to think, how do we change this? But it's also fearful to go like, what if we get it wrong? And so that took about 6 months. The board was decisive. By that point, we had consensus among everyone in the room and those that we felt like we needed to hear from. And there were definitely some others that we had to meet and talk to along the way. And the reactions were very supportive. I mean, there were some cautions, but I also knew some hard data that we weren't quite satisfied with our level of market and media presence given the name we had. So it wasn't like we were an established brand. And I worked for a nonprofit that was up there with Coke, right? So if I told you what it was, you'd be like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. So you get it. Like if you're on that kind of pedestal, you don't try to do much to it. But we knew that because we weren't where we wanted to be, that we weren't going to lose as much as we thought if we changed it now. So that is how it started. But then that became more about change management than it was really about the introduction to those whose opinions we wanted to hear.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's so many nonprofits that are still the best kept secret. So you're right. Like, unless it's, the top charity that so many of us, you say the name like Coke and we're like, oh yeah, I know exactly what it is and know what the mission does, know exactly where they are in my community. So with all of this, I'm curious, looking back, right? Hindsight's always 2020. If you would share with us, Matt, like what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned during the rebranding process? And also, I'm curious if there were any surprises or challenges that you did not anticipate that, of course, showed up.
Yeah, well, an important part of this, your phrase there about being a best kept secret is actually something that Kathy Graham has mentioned. And important to this conversation is she handles marketing at a high level at Desert Financial Credit Union, who famously rebranded from Desert Schools. And they even had a rock star come out and, Alice Cooper come do Schools Out Forever as a commercial. Like they're making this a community-based credit union and then acknowledging their prior history of being founded by teachers. And so there was this awareness there that like, yes, it is important. Yes, it might be hard, but it is worth doing. And here's how to do it. So we depended on a lot of that insight, and that fabulous group donated some expertise to us around a system of change called ADKAR, which spells out awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and then reinforcement. And it's a sequential way of looking. So without knowing it, we were working through this. And in my own training in like the psychological spaces, we call this the trans-theoretical model. We talk about what is somebody's unconscious readiness. Can we move them to knowing now there's suddenly a problem? And then that might incline them to the next step, which is, well, what would it look like to potentially solve my problem. But if you start at the beginning and tell them, here's the solution, and they don't believe they have a problem, you're not going to get anywhere. So AdCard takes that in step, right? Builds awareness, builds desire. And that's what we wanted, is we wanted to know that because we were doing this, people were going to be re-excited about what we're about again, that it was something that we're like, I love you. This is the best thing. Yes, I'm on board. Don't want it to be a kept secret. This is a beautiful thing. Let's tell more people about it. And then behind some of those components were, how do people know more about it? Now, your questions about lessons and challenges. Those are important parts here because these are things you only get later. And I think there are people who will, write down, hear all these stories because they're thinking about doing this and they're going to try and find all the potholes that others will get. And trust me, I did the same. I tried to figure out that. And then we also have our very own. And I think part of what happens when you're doing this kind of system of change is to understand really where your org's bias is as a living thing. Where does it get stuck? And a real powerful metaphor that I adapted from a book called Immunity to Change, which gives us one simple idea that applies to this, which is there are moments where we believe something's the right thing in the right direction, and then we step on the gas and the brake at the same time. And the trick is to realize, what is it about the brake move that is a private internal commitment? And so what I would tell you about my beloved institution and organization, which I've said it kindly in many spaces so they won't be shocked, is we avoid what feels uncomfortable. We're avoidant. We're not brash. We're not bold. We put innovation as a core value on the wall, which is a good thing, but it's a lot harder for us to operate that way. Enough that I'm frequently the one as the leader that's telling them, you tried something, it didn't work, get up, it's okay. What's not okay is not trying, right? Not learning from what we did here. So we have innovation as a value, but it became an example of where we might say we want to try and do new things, but also I'm terrified of what if one person or somebody or what if nobody likes it? The what if game takes over, and that's that break coming down and putting taking this traction and making it difficult. So that culminated in a very unique afternoon in December. So it's already been 18 months since the original conversation. It's 10 months since we decided to do it, and 6 months since we said, let's stretch it out, talk to more people, and get into the next calendar year before we make it public. But now it's time to announce that we are going to do this in writing. We're going to have some town halls so you can come hear why. And we're going to have a wonderful event in February that you can come attend where we're going to celebrate it. So this is last December, and I got a little ping that the people who actually write the emails to send them out were struggling to hit the submit button. Yeah. And so it was the moment of that's that real test of gas pedal brake. Yeah. We're afraid, aren't we? And then
That is
getting. I told them,
yeah.
If it goes bad, it's on me. So push the button.
Right. Just okay. hit it.
Yeah, no. And I mean, the thing is, I get it. I don't know what will happen either. I also know that I'm leaving town in a couple of days, so I need you to push it now. So if there's real pushback, I can get it live, because you don't want me to be catching this on vacation or letting it fester for a week. Push it now so we can see what happens.
Yeah.
I know you're afraid. I'm here. Don't worry. If it goes bad, it's me. It's me. You can blame me, right? And we pushed it. And really nothing happened. We got questions. We got some emails. People came to the town halls. But the word had been spreading for so long that within inside this was oh, this is how we're going to do it. So again, we don't do this. We're humans. We are conflict avoidant, and we're also kind of risk calculators continually. That's what keeps us alive and healthy, and you need to do it. But we rarely stop and go, okay, I had this big list of what ifs, but none of them happened. So when we hit submit and it was kind of peaceful weather, and then we had some conversations and we had our town halls and the momentum started building, we have to remember that that is also possible too, alongside the things we get worried about.
Well, and I think you had socialized it so much so well, right? Like with these stakeholder groups. I love innovation, Matt, and I see us, I myself included, where we are avoidant of that, right? I see in our nonprofit space, what I believe is holding us back is that we can't afford, in air quotes, to take risk, right? Like, what if that does damage to our financial health? What if our donors don't trust that risk that we took? Or, what if someone loses their job because they did push that button and, all what broke loose? But
Yeah.
I really appreciate like so much thoughtfulness that went into this. And for me, you're making it sound like it was really a great experience. I'm not saying that there weren't hiccups, there weren't obstacles, there weren't things that, went astray, but for nonprofit leaders that are listening and they're wondering whether a rebrand is right for them and their organization, because let's be honest, Matt, there are 1.8 million registered nonprofits in the US.
Mhm.
Several of them, I'm sure, have had this come across their discussions or their strategic planning conversations. What advice would you give them right now, right before maybe they begin this process? And the second part of this question I want to ask you is, along with that, what should they prioritize, right? Prioritize by way of ensuring that the change strengthens their mission and community relationships, just as it did for you.
Yeah, I think that my metric of was this a success, and I think that I'm not being bold or um, filtering out the negatives to say that. I think others will share that opinion, such that our biggest issues are like, how do we get the permit for the sign on the building? And like, the little things, the details that, and thanks ops team for doing all that stuff. Cause, shout out to them. So that's all important parts of it. But I think rolling back to what makes it a success is the moment where, and we love it, we use one of those kind of donating swipe interfaces where people can write a comment immediately when they donate. So why did you donate? And we get all kinds of stuff. And it's awesome. Like in the prime time of our fundraising year, it's like I get up so I can read the comments, right? Like I want to see what people wrote. And after the name change happened, which we did before tax credit day, because we're a QFCO, so the Qualified Foster Care Charitable Org, April 15th, like there's a little jeopardy of like, did we confuse our audience 2 months before the biggest deadline? And we didn't. I think we clearly expanded our base. But what we started to see were a few comments like, in the box, Art Heals Arizona, yes. And that's what you want is, does this engage in a way that we are not engaging now? Because the silly way I've said it internally is, in the naming scheme of both profit, for-profit, nonprofit are the made-up nouns, right? Drug companies do this. Trulicity, what is it? It's a word we made up to sell you a drug, okay? And then there's the very literal nonprofit name. You know what I'm talking about? Like a particular person has gone through a thing, and so it's the I don't know, the person on the street corner. It's a very literal, like a feeding nonprofit. Like they're going to put the activity or the circumstance in the name. And we didn't want the either extreme. We're not going for neutral sounding word or a direct description. We're moving away from that. So we centered around something that engages around what people get excited about, which is that art itself is the centerpiece of what we do around group mentoring, that we are all committed to this journey of well-being and finding that we're committed to the sense of healing. Healing itself for some can be a challenged word because it makes it mean that you have to perform or it has to be to somebody else's specification. And we're like, no, we're always trying to regulate and trying to find the best for us. And we're here to support young people, children, and families at a place where they have very little control over that and they're growing that capacity. That's our rootedness there. So why do it? Does it engage what's not quite engaged, right? And that is something that came through in the data for people because we have this experience of what's fabulous about being our organization is people get excited about art, and people also get excited about supporting children who've been through very difficult, adverse, and traumatic things and supporting them. But we put them together. And there's these beautiful examples, both in the testimony of people's lives, but also in the physical art you can witness that tell that story. And so centering it in and around that became the way and the reason and the method for doing it. And so the receipts coming back, and I don't mean that in the actual financial sense, but like the people who are responding to the message, we're engaging around what we aspire to because it causes people to react. We want them, when we talk about, and this is something I hope our sector gets, is we think we have to scare people or use kind of the most traumatic experiences of people's lives to engage a learner. And I think everyone sitting in the space has the same struggles. Deep down, they're wondering if they're enough, if they fit in, and what happens if no one talks to me again. They could be a billionaire or they could be owing $1 billion. And they're going to have the same fundamental human questions to settle. And so if we just give them the experience to feel what it's like to have those questions unanswered, they'll give. I don't have to show you something explicit or difficult. I can make you feel that you might know what that feels like. We call it empathy, but other people might use a different term for it. But we can cause that to happen, and names can do that. And so I would say that I think we've been successful because it captured that. We kind of knew what the secret sauce was. I really think in hindsight, we just needed from leader to leader. I think the number one advice is you got to count your capital. Like, there's no way I could launch this first. I can't say this right away. I would be like a monster trudging through the garden of tulips here to go and tell all these people that their name needs to change. Count your votes, count your capital. And then when there's movement toward the thing you want, like this is where we're all in a boat with an oar each, and we're going to row toward that shore together. And so doesn't mean it was perfect or that we're seamless or the things we wouldn't do differently, but it was, and give yourself credit for good enough. And some things are good enough. And this was a good enough process that we're here now on that happily on the other side. We are also continually having to tell people we used to be known as free arts, right? And we're going to do that for a couple of years, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Again, really just want to give you kudos, Matt. And I hear you giving it to your team and everyone involved. So thank you for that. You're clearly a phenomenal leader. But what I'm hearing is so much thoughtfulness in this. I know I said that earlier, but it really so much thoughtfulness. I mean, I shared the date of 2009. This wasn't a flip of a light switch. It didn't happen overnight. A lot of conversation went into this. So thank you for sharing your experience. I know everybody's experience could be different, but I think hearing yours, I have a feeling some leaders are hearing themselves in you or hearing some opportunities that you've shared. So I am sure that people are going to want to connect with you, Matt. So how can people learn more about you and even the organization?
Yeah, arthealsaz.org is our website. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty prolific there on things I post, both related to our work directly, but also the sector itself and what it means to care for others in a capitalist economy, which is a discussion point. And so these are things that are important to me, and reach out, and I'd be happy to learn more about what you're going through and kind of share how good things can be and give people a little bit of hope. But bottom line is, I think we're hindered when we allow fear to drive the car. And sometimes we just need it to be in the car. It just doesn't get to be in the driver's seat.
Yeah. I feel like you've said several of these throughout our conversation, Matt, but I'm going to ask for any final takeaway. I'm going to add even sage advice, right? But anything that you would want other leaders that are listening to this conversation right now, what is it you want to leave them with? What is it you want them to know?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing here is these decisions, how we name, how we talk about what we are, these are fundamentally emotionally driven decisions. And as much as we want to pride ourselves on being rational, logical, we're not. That's not how we're wired. This is why emotions exist. It's my therapeutic training coming out to say, don't be scared of that. Notice it. And that doesn't mean that we have to settle an answer to everyone else's feelings about things. But we got to know that there's going to be a process around it. Like, let's socialize the idea, because if it produces grief, and for some it will, we allow that. And if it, for some it's a challenge that isn't really receptive to the data, we separate that. That's a feeling of challenge that's away from this data that's telling me that, like, that belief that if we do this, this bad thing will happen. That's not real. That's not what others are telling us. And then also, like, depending on each other and having a board who would take the lead on this and then allow staff to make it happen, but to know that at the end of the day, we were both just a call or a text away, if needed. And I think that's, something that I learned very early as a nonprofit leader, is to keep a volunteer between yourself and trouble. And they mean a policy, a board member, the board itself. Like, don't make them adversaries. These are your assets when it comes to managing the public perception of our institution. And so I think that's what I would leave, is like, embrace the fact that we're emotional creatures, because that is why we bond. That's why we love a thing. And if you care for something like this, you want people to love your nonprofit, your work. It's not just, a simple transaction like any other place you could buy gas or any other of these commodities. You want a genuinely full human experience with your work. And that means embracing emotion as it is.
Matt, thank you. Thank you so much. I am leaving with so many more insights around conversations of rebrand. I've not been involved in the thick of it, if you will. I've kind of been in on some stakeholder conversations throughout my time, but really appreciate you sharing your insights, your lived experience with us, your journey. Again, I know this is landing in nonprofit leaders' ears that are either considering this or they might be going through this now. So hopefully all of you listening, you are walking away with some insight from Matt. And again, thank you for sharing.
Thanks for letting me be here.